15 pages here. Is that right?
So the lesson starts on page 141, and it's talking about, basically it's talking about forgiveness. It's Joseph and his brothers' family reconciliation. Good morning. The point of the lesson is forgiveness can lead to family healing and restoration.
That's good when we got no dates.
We're gonna have to switch roles with the men.
We are. We're on page 141, Faye. Okay. The point is, forgiveness can lead to family healing and restoration. The lesson was based out of Genesis 42, 3 through 5, and 21 through 24a, and then it jumps to 45, 1 through 5. And where there's gaps, I've sort of filled it in on what happened in between point A and point B. Okay, the lesson was saying refusing to forgive others is one of the greatest roadblocks in both your personal, your church, and your family relationships. How many of you all have had conflicts with your family? All right. How hard is it to forgive family? It's very hard, isn't it? And the main thing that we need to look at is that when that happens, we really need to look at it and try to forgive and work it out then instead of letting it stew over time, because it just gets worse, right?
I think when it's with family, you're more hurt.
Right.
Hurts you. Where a stranger, well, I let it go, no, forget about it. But
Right.
family member, it hurts.
It does.
Makes it harder.
It does. It really does. We can't move forward to be the person God calls us to be when we're holding resentment and unforgiving attitude, because it weighs us down. Good morning.
It will actually hinder your prayer life.
It will.
There are verses about that, but I don't remember.
And have you ever heard the situation that if you can't forgive, how can God forgive us? If we're holding all this resentment, we're supposed to be ambassadors to Christ. We're supposed to show that, right? So we need to think about that, because somebody is watching our walk. And if we're holding resentment and all that up, they're watching us and saying, well, if she's a Christian, why is she not forgiving? Why is she holding this resentment? It must be okay. And I'm not just looking at you.
I'm really just trying to get you to get your hands away from your mouth.
Okay.
I love you.
When we make the first step in forgiving, regardless of how we are, how hurt we are on the right path to reconciliation and strengthening the relationship. And when we do that, that also strengthens our relationship with God, right? Mm-hmm. Okay. We know that the Lord was with Joseph while he was in prison. And while he was in prison, he interpreted dreams. Well, the cupbearer got out and forgot about him, but then the Pharaoh needed to have something interpreted, and it was 2 years after that. And he came and interpreted the dreams for him. Do you know what the dream was that he interpreted? It's got to do with abundance and famine.
7 years of plenty and 7 years of famine.
Right. And so that gave Pharaoh enough time to be able to store up, when they had abundance, to store that up to last them through the famine. Okay. On page 142. Yes, please, Joy.
Okay. Genesis 42, 3 through 5. And Joseph's 10 brethren went down to buy corn in Egypt. But Benjamin, Joseph's brother, Jacob sent not his brethren, for he said, lest peradventure mischief, thank you, befall him. And the sons of Israel came to buy corn among those that came, for the famine was in the land of Canaan.
Okay. So, what was the crisis that the brothers got sent to Egypt for?
Famine.
Because they were hungry.
Famine. They were hungry, right? Why did he only send 10 of his sons and not all of them?
He was afraid something would happen to the youngest.
Right.
Like it happened to Joseph.
That's his favorite.
That's his. And see, he didn't learn from the first one. Because I didn't catch that until I was reading the lesson. I thought, he did it again. So, do you think that Jacob learned anything from the first time around? But he really doesn't. Do you think he might have known that there was some mischief going on
You would have
with
thought,
the brothers?
You would have thought he would have after the first, but
He's awful protective of these. Look, the last time one of my children went out with you, they didn't come back. So this one is stay.
you would have thought he would have learned from his mistake. But you know,
Peter, what do you think about that?
Well, I think, and it may have actually been in the lesson, I know I read it somewhere that, and don't think I had thought about this part of it until I had read it while studying it this time, that he was the one that had sent Joseph, so I don't think he realized what the brothers had done, and so he bore the guilt himself of what had happened to Joseph, because had he not sent him himself,
maybe that wouldn't have happened.
Maybe it wouldn't have happened, and he didn't want that to happen again. But there was somewhere in one of the books that I was studying out of had threw that question out. What if Joseph may have thought that the brothers had done something? And I never had thought about it from that aspect either. But as a parent, if I had let my child go and they didn't come back, I would not let.
I wouldn't let none of them go.
No, but he was willing to let his other 10 go.
Well, you know, I was thinking about Jenna and Jacob and how hard it must have been for Russell and Mary Jo to let Jacob go all the way to Lexington. But they did it in faith, knowing he's covered.
and the fact that you're starving has a lot to do with it.
It really does. It really does.
I mean, he basically said, Dad, if you don't let us go, we're going to starve.
Okay, Joseph and Benjamin were sons of who?
Rachel.
Rachel. Yeah. And was Rachel Jacob's favorite? Right. So that was another thing that he was hoping, because he didn't even have Rachel anymore. She had already passed. So, Benjamin was the last thing that he thought that he had with Rachel. Do you think that maybe during all this he might have thought about his behavior that was connected to his brother Esau during any of this?
I don't think I had ever considered it.
I hadn't either. The book threw that out. So I just wanted to see what you all thought. We learned from this that some of the pain of loss may lessen over time, but it still may affect us, our actions and attitudes and thoughts, just like Vita was saying about letting one child go. You may think twice about doing that again. But when we get into a conflict, I think that we carry that for a long time if it's not resolved. And that affects how we interact and do other things.
It does.
In the future. And God's always there to listen to us. I mean, just imagine all the sins that we have done, and He still forgave us. And ours was probably a lot worse than what somebody has done against us, right? But He still forgives us, and He still loves us. Okay. Crisis can drive us toward discovering the good that only God can do. In the midst of a crisis, has anybody ever had a crisis that there's been good come out of? Maybe not right at that moment, but maybe even years down the road. Has anybody ever experienced that? Okay.
I think losing my papa Kurt led me back
church.
And that's in the middle of a crisis. How many of you all have had situations, maybe you've got church hurt? Church hurt, I think, is a whole different level of when you can, when you get hurt because you feel like that's your safest spot to be. And some people have thought about that. But one thing that Paul had said to us one time in church is that there is not one church that's not going to have its problems. And you're not going to find a church that's perfect. So, do we need to run every time there's a problem? What do we need to do?
Pray.
We need to pray, we need to forgive, and we need to go to that person, right? And we need to talk with them. Because I think that just makes us more stronger. Because we're going to get hurt. That's a given. Because we're all fallible, right? Just like me teaching today. I'm fallible. But no, it really stems clear that we need to be really open and receptive and want to do God's will. And we're not forgiving them for their sake. We need to do it for ours to, and truly forgive. Don't say, okay, I forgive you, then throw it back up to them years later. I was really good for that. I still am to a point if you ask Brian. But that I'm a work in progress. Okay, does anybody have any questions over those few verses? Would you like to add anything, Miss Vita?
No, the only thing that I do want to point out, if you didn't go back and read any of the previous chapters, is one of my favorite parts. And there's a lot of good things in this, but in chapter 1, when Joseph was naming his children, did any of y'all see that? What he named his children and why?
It was Manasseh and Ephraim. But...
Yeah, and it says Manasseh. For God said, He hath made me forget all my toil and all my father's house. So, that's what he's saying there. The Lord enabled him to, to not let, the hurt or the loss that he had felt to keep him from being all that God intended for him to be. And I love the next one. He says, he had named his second son, he named Ephraim. And this is so good. It's in 41 and 52. And it says, and the name of the second called he Ephraim. For God have caused me to be fruitful in the land of my affliction. Now, people, that says so much. When you think you're in a difficult spot, the Lord can sometimes really, He can produce spiritual growth, He can produce spiritual fruit, and it's not a time to just try to avoid or to escape or get out of as soon as you can, but it's a time to say, Lord, accomplish all that you intend to do, through and in me. And those are two really good verses if you don't have them marked.
Okay. Anybody else? Okay, on page 143. Beth, you want to read that for us, please?
And they said one to another, We are verily guilty concerning our brother, and that we saw the anguish of his soul when he besought us, and we would not hear. Therefore is this distress come upon us. And Reuben answered them, saying, Spake I not unto you, saying, Do not sin against the child, and you would not hear? Therefore, behold, also his blood is required. And they knew not that Joseph understood them, for he spake unto them by an interpreter. And he turned himself about from them and wept.
Okay.
I really like that verse. Didn't I tell you?
Yeah, I love it. It's like, I told you so, right? The brothers at this point are showing a hint of sorrow and repentance, and it can be heard as the brothers are responding to the certain current circumstances. Okay, what did they finally admit to themselves?
They had done wrong.
They'd done wrong. Right. So why did they think of their brother at this point? Because they don't know it's Joseph. So what brought all that to be, do you think? Why all of a sudden they're starting to regret what they did?
I was
They're
thinking
reaping
that-
what they
I
sow.
was thinking the dreams that he had, and that he,
Well, see, they don't know they don't know he's Joseph yet.
yeah. I was just thinking back at the stuff that he had said before.
Yeah, that's
That
gonna
maybe
slap
they
him
were
in the face in just a
thinking-
little bit.
Maybe,
It could, yeah. They were actually feeling guilty about their brother, and they didn't know that was their brother, and they didn't know that Joseph was hearing what they were saying. They thought that this interpreter was translating everything, right? So they were sitting there, and I just love it the way Reuben said, like Kim was saying, I told you so. And that's kind of hard too when somebody says I told you so after you went through something and you knew you did wrong, but then when somebody tells you, see, I told you this was going to happen. Okay. Does anybody have any comment? Okay. They didn't recognize Joseph, but Joseph recognized them right away. And it talks about anguish of the soul. What do you think that means? Did anybody look that up? It tells us to look that up.
I didn't.
You didn't? Nobody did? Did you, Peter?
I didn't
Did
even
you-
see that in the lesson.
Yeah, they don't.
Did you look it up? Because I'm hoping you're going to share it with us.
It's on page 143 and verse 21. No, it can refer to anything confining or constricting. Joseph had pleaded for mercy, but they didn't hear him. Can you imagine? He's begging and pleading while they are carting him off, and they're not even responding to him. How I almost cried when I read that, because that's just so profound. How can you let somebody go and they're begging and pleading? Imagine what he was going through.
That's what
And-
we had talked about last week, where they had said down, you'd said they were sitting eating a meal while he was pleading to.
Right.
yeah.
And just ignored him. And how can you do that? And that wasn't the end of his anguish. He was brought before, and he was a servant to Potiphar. And then he got falsely accused. They threw him in prison. And then he stayed there for quite a while. And finally, when he went to interpret those dreams, he was let out and made second in command. Right? And what do you think of how Reuben responded? What do you think about that?
I loved it a whole lot.
I did too. However, he was just as guilty
Mm-hmm.
because he did nothing proactive at the time. To me. Does anybody else see it that way? That Reuben was just as guilty?
Well, I don't know. They had beat him up and put him in a pit. And I don't know. Maybe Reuben was afraid that they would do something to him as well.
Yeah, if I remember correctly, Reuben actually was the one that convinced them to sell him so that they wouldn't kill him.
Right.
Yeah.
So he did, I guess, in the situation, he probably did. Ah,
Yeah, but he still let him sell him. But anyway.
And didn't tell anybody.
Well, that's true too. Yeah, I can see Reuben saying, I told you so, and putting a little bit of his guilt on to them. But that's how I saw it. The brothers knew that Joseph could understand. They didn't understand that he understood them. When Joseph heard the brothers' remorse, he turned and wept. Why?
Because they were sorry and he was sorry and everybody was sorry. And I know somebody else who weeps really easy like that. But because I think that he was, once he realized who they were and he heard how remorseful that maybe he was relieved that it
well,
wasn't going to have to be a big thing.
right. And it really, just imagine hearing all that. And you've got to keep your composure. But he turned and he wept. The next part when he cries, is heart
And
wrenching.
the whole house hears him.
Yeah, and he sends his people away and everything. He decided to spare Reuben when he put the brothers in prison, right? And then he pulled them out. And he gave them their grain to take back. It refers to corn, but corn wasn't really the product. It was productions of wheat, barley. Am I correct on that?
You are.
Okay, thank you. Kim, you're
I told you that I skimmed it.
okay. But he decided to spare Reuben. Why do you think he decided to spare Reuben?
Because Reuben told him not to. He told him not to.
Right. And he heard Reuben say, "I told you so." So he put Simon in, and he sent the others back home, right? Because he wanted, when he was asking about their family and was asking them, you know, who all was at home, and they said, we have a younger brother, we have a brother that is no longer, and then we have our father. So he said, bring back the younger. If you want Simon, you're going to have to bring back the youngest. And so he gave them supplies and he sent them on their way. But he put silver in each of their bags. He put their money back in their bags, right? Okay. And they saw that, and then they brought Benjamin back. And we're getting ready to get into that because I think I'm jumping ahead. And Jacob ordered double the silver and gifts. Did I skip a page?
You skipped something.
I did.
I don't think it's in the verse. It's probably in your notes.
It is. I skipped a whole page. Okay. What often it prevents us from admitting when we're wrong?
Pride.
Pride. What are the benefits of repenting?
Forgiveness.
And you restore that relationship, either with whomever you've held unforgiveness against or the Lord.
Right. And how hard is that to do?
Depends on how stubborn you are.
It depends on the type of hurt that you have
I don't know,
and
did I get to be petty first?
who it's with.
Because if I can be petty first, I tend to do a little better.
I think we all do that. Okay, some of the lessons that we learned from Genesis 42:21 through 24a is a critical step in moving forward in a broken relationship is to acknowledge one's own wrongdoing. Little good comes from feigning innocence and faulting others for a wrong. How many of us have done that? Well, if you hadn't done that, I wouldn't have done this.
I think that's our natural tendency, human sinful tendency to do that.
To find a common scapegoat. We do it all the time. And even sometimes I think when we go to the Lord, we will say, that's okay, you just keep doing that. We tend to say, Lord, if this hadn't have happened, I don't think I would have done this. Do you think he actually believes that?
No, because he already knows what you're going to do before you do it.
Well, and then he tends to point out to you, really, because...
He does.
Mm-hmm.
He really does. And I think we need to pray for conviction. That way, you know, God is constantly searching our heart and bringing it forward to us. That way we can actually repent of what we've done. Because there is nothing on this earth that can replace our relationship with Christ. That's what it all boils down to. We need to act like ambassadors of Christ. We need to walk the way he walked, or as close as we possibly can, but we need to be forgiving. And we need, because that's what Jesus would have done, right? Okay, and we always need to let the truth be told. Does anybody have any questions? Do you have anything to add, Miss Phoebe?
Go on, maybe in a minute.
Okay. All right. Okay. Let's turn to page 146 and Genesis 45, 1 through 5. Kirsten, do you mind reading that, please?
Then Joseph could not refrain himself before all them that stood by him, and he cried, Cause every man to go out from me. And there stood no man with him, while Joseph made himself known unto his brethren. And he wept aloud, and the Egyptians and the house of Pharaoh heard. And Joseph said unto his brethren, I am Joseph, doeth my father yet live? And his brethren could not answer him, for they were troubled at his presence. And Joseph said unto his brethren, Come near to me, I pray you. And they came near, and he said, I am Joseph your brother, whom ye sold into Egypt. Now therefore be not grieved, nor angry with yourselves that ye sold me hither, for God did send me before you to preserve life.
Okay. Joseph's revelation of himself to his brothers shows a lot of forgiveness, because at that moment he forgives them for everything that they had done, and they had done quite a bit. And it's been 20 years, so some people would let that fester, right, over that long period of time. And probably somebody, if you saw the people that had done you that much hurt and grief come to get food, you could have probably sent them away. But Joseph even recognized them at that point and let them have it. He did get a little bit of revenge, throwing them in jail for just a little bit, though. When the brothers discovered, the silver, they were frightened. They thought that Jacob was going to really lose it when they had to go back and ask for. They left one brother and had to bring Benjamin back, right? And so when they brought him back, and they're at this point right now. So what do you think the brothers felt when they heard him announce who he was?
So I've been scared, thinking, what's he going to do to me?
That would be mine. Even though he says, I forgive you and don't be afraid, I would be thinking, okay, he might do this as long as my dad's alive, but what's going to happen when my dad dies? Or, you know, they were confronted with all these things that they had done, and I'm sure they were petrified, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so how did he respond emotionally? How did Joseph respond to this? When he's finally got home, he sees his brother, he sees his dad, he sees all of them. No, he doesn't see his brother. He doesn't see his dad yet, does he? Not yet.
I don't think so.
No.
No, it's at the end.
So, what do you think he felt?
Well, if he didn't see his dad or his brother, he's probably upset.
Well, no, when he finally, he's at this point where he's crying.
Oh,
What do you think all these emotions were?
happy that at least he still has a family.
Mm-hmm.
His dad's still alive.
Mm-hmm. So what did he do with his staff that was there? He sent them out. And then when he's crying, Pharaoh and the whole house heard him. And that's just like a mourning type cry. I would have been petrified to stand there and listen to that and know what I had did to him, right? So some of the things that I thought of, they would be thrown in prison. Is he going to kill us? We're at his mercy. And I'm sure they realized at that point, and I found these in the other book, but I also thought, you know, they realized they had to bow down to him.
And the dreams had come true.
Exactly, and the dream came true. Okay. When he said, be not grieved, what did he mean by that when he told that to the brothers?
Don't worry, I'm not going to hurt you.
Right.
I'm not going to hurt you.
And that was his, you know, response to wanting them to come closer, and for them to start reconnecting as a family. Some of the things that I thought of, he would be thrown in prison. And I thought of, they would be thrown in prison. And for them to start reconnecting as a family. family conflicts can't be resolved without forgiving. It's the only path that leads to healing and true reconciliation. The release of emotions can help us deal with the pain of our past. That release is not destructive or revengeful. And I think it helps us. I mean, when we're holding all that animosity and stuff, it just doesn't affect us mentally. It affects us physically, and it hurts us spiritually, because it can stun us right there. Because do you think that us not forgiving affects our prayers?
Mm-hmm.
Do you think it affects our relationship with Christ?
Mhm.
It does. Do you think, what does it do to the other person when we're holding on to this? The person
Nothing.
that we're at.
No.
So, why do we do it? Why do we ask and try to resolve, so we can have forgiveness and forgive the other person?
Because we feel justified in being mad.
So, what about it is when we need to ask for forgiveness?
Oh, we think we deserve that.
Right. But does it take us a while to realize that we're in the wrong?
Usually, always.
Mm-hmm.
It does. And I ask God to convict me when I've done something. Well, I ask it in every day of my prayer, so that way God's always looking over my heart, and that I can feel that conviction when I've done something wrong. And it's very hard for me to admit when I've done something wrong. But that's something that we have to do, because, you know, Christ doesn't want us to argue, especially amongst ourselves. And he doesn't, because we're a lot to somebody. Somebody is watching our walk. And if we have something that's held up with somebody, if we won't forgive somebody, or we won't ask for forgiveness, that's just as bad. It shouldn't have to be the other person to come to us and say, you're wrong. We should pray to try to walk as best as we can in the light of Christ. Our desire to restore broken relationships ought to be a priority each and every day. Okay? Forgiveness does not mean the past has to be forgotten. We can learn from that, but I tend to think if we're going to truly forgive, what does Christ do for us when we ask for forgiveness? What does he do with that?
East to the west.
Does he remember it anymore?
No.
Then why should we hang on to it? You can forgive, but I won't forget.
Well, part of that is, though, I mean, it's not necessarily that you're going to forget it and it's going to be oblivious to you that it ever happened, but it's that you're not going to let that determine how you respond to that person. That's not going to determine, how you treat that other person or how you relate to that other person, because it doesn't mean necessarily that you have to forget it as if it never happened. You just, that isn't the controlling force in your life.
So, when things like this happen, do you use it as a teaching moment?
You should.
I think when you
You
can,
should.
I think when you can regularly practice forgiveness, it gets easier to do.
It does. And it also helps us learn how to go about the next situation, because this isn't going to be our only situation. We deal with this stuff on a day-to-day basis. And they should all be learning experiences, because God has placed this in our life for a reason that we can learn from and to grow from. And we need to do all this for his glory, right? It's not for us. It's for us to walk a better walk. But anytime that we do something, we're showing the light of Christ to the world, right? And the best part about all of this is that if one of us here is not saved, the best thing that you can do is offer that prayer to become saved. And I'm sure all of you all have heard this before, but if you feel like you want to walk as a Christian, it's so very simple. All you have to do is, go to God honestly, and I'm going to cry. You can go to God honestly and ask Him to forgive you of your sins. You truly believe that, and He will save you. And there's nothing in the world that attains that kind of forgiveness. And it's not to mean that you won't have bad times, because I think when we get closer to Christ, that's when more things come into our life, right?
Because the devil's fighting you.
But if anybody here is not saved and they want to learn more about being saved, or they want to talk to one of us, all of us are here to help and to offer that walk that Christ so urgently wants everybody to do. And it doesn't matter what anybody has done. And I think that's the ultimate forgiveness. It doesn't matter what we've done. It doesn't matter where we're at in our life. It doesn't, God doesn't say, well, when you get your life together, you come to me. No, God wants you just as you are, right where you're at. And He will forgive you. All you have to do is, ask Him with a sincere heart and to come into your life, and He will do that. And He will forgive you. Does anybody have any questions with that? Yes, and y'all got to see my power of forgiveness right here. Does anybody have anything to add? Any questions?
How much time we got?
It's
Very little.
very little. So,
One thing I would like to emphasize in this, if you, in Genesis 15, 19, and 20, and that really lets us know how that, where Joseph says this. Now, this is at the end of the situation where he says, "But as for you, ye thought evil against me, but God meant it unto good, to bring to pass as it is this day." All right, and that emphasizes throughout Joseph's life. It's not just something that he realizes at the end of this, after he's been lifted up to the position that he's in, but this is something he knew throughout, is that God had a purpose for what He was allowing him to have to suffer. And if you remember, when Joseph was in Potiphar's house, when Joseph was in prison, when Joseph responded rightly, every time it said, and God showed favor unto Joseph. But this is what enabled Joseph to respond rightly to the bad situations that he was in, even though when it was happening, he didn't know what God intended to do or what God was doing. He trusted a God that had a purpose for good. Romans 8:28, "For God works all things for good to those who love Him or are called according to His purpose." Now, too, I want you to see the transformation with the brothers. When the brothers came the first time and they had Benjamin and Joseph sent them back, what did he do? What did he put in Joseph's backpack?
In Benjamin.
in
Benjamin's,
he
yeah.
put a silver cup.
Right, he put a silver cup, and he did that in order to test the brothers to see if they had really changed.
They would throw him under the bus.
And they didn't.
They stood up for him at that point.
So you see, what you don't see is what God was doing through that situation in the brothers' lives. But at this point in time in history, we know that even though the Lord allowed that and he worked it favorably in Joseph's life, somehow he used those things. We don't even know how he did it, but somehow he used those things to bring his brothers to the position to where they needed to be too, to where that they were right with the Lord. That's it. There's so many good things in there. And if you remember when, Joseph was in prison and he had thought, okay, they're going to tell the king, they're going to tell Pharaoh that I'm here unjustly, and I'm finally going to get out of here. And he said, let him know I've not done anything to be in here. I'm being held unjustly. And, and he thinks, and how do you think he felt when a couple of days went by? Do you think he was counting down the days? He was counting down the hours. They're going to come and get me any minute. Any minute I'm going to be released.
It was
Then
2 years.
the days turned into weeks. The weeks turned into months. And it says in there, it doesn't just say that it was 2 years. The way the author writes it, it says it was 2 full years. Now that lets you know that it was difficult. It was difficult. If you think the Christian life is a bed of roses, you're not living the Christian life. That's not what it is. And it's in 1 Peter, Jesus says, if I let you suffer and you don't deserve it and you respond rightly, then you're glorifying God. God is glorified in that because he left us an example. Jesus suffered unjustly, and he leaves us as an example. So, very good, Elizabeth, very good. And 2, I want to remind you, in Ephesians 4, where it says, where it talks about forgiving, if God requires us to forgive, then whose responsibility is it to enable us to forgive?
The Holy Spirit.
It is God's, right? So you can pray, God, this is what you require of me. So if this is what you require of me, then you're going to have to enable me to do that. And he will. Elizabeth.